Hello and welcome to the Customer Conversations podcast. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by the incredible Claire Suellentrop. Claire is the co-founder of Elevate, Forget the Funnel, and previously led marketing at Calendly. She's an expert in all things customer insights and has helped companies like Wistia and Full Story unlock sustainable growth. Claire, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. And thank you for that intro. That made me sound so cool.
Pretty cool.
That was a very kind intro.
Of course. Yeah. Claire is one of my favorite people in marketing. We've known each other for a while. So I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. And I think for those people who don't know you and don't know your work with, I guess, Forget the Funnel and now with Elevate, maybe you can tell people a little bit about what you actually do and what you help your clients do at Elevate.
Sure, absolutely. So my business partner, Georgiana Lottie, and I are co-founders of a company called Elevate, as you mentioned. Elevate, I would consider the consulting or client services arm of our business, in which we work with SaaS companies really across the customer journey, so to speak, to help them identify where their biggest opportunity for growth is, and then enable their team to actually act on that opportunity. So rather than what you might define as a quote unquote traditional marketing advisory team that may focus only on acquisition, for example, we're really working full customer journey from acquisition all the way to implementing retention programs and everything in between. Then the other aspect of our business, as you just mentioned, is Forget the Funnel, which is I would call it, we're still playing around, honestly, with the best way to package up and describe Forget the Funnel, but a membership site, honestly, is the best way I could describe it at the moment. It's where we share tons of workshops and resources and all kinds of learning materials to help people really do on their own what we do when we work with clients.
Yeah, I know Forget the Funnel is such an incredible resource all by itself. I can't remember what it is. We have linked to it a whole lot in our content. So I know that there's a ton of marketers who are much better off from that resource being available and in the world. So wow. One of the things that I know you guys talk about a lot, both on the Forget the Funnel workshops and sort of in your own writing, and something I really want to sort of unpack in this conversation, is this idea of being customer-led or customer-driven, whatever you sort of exact terminology you want to use there. But the idea that the customer is sort of driving the things that you do. So I'm really curious to hear from your perspective, sort of how do you define what customer-led growth means, and what does that sort of actually mean in practice?
Sure. So thank you for the kind words about Forget the Funnel. That's so appreciated. Glad to dive into the whole customer-led, customer-driven concept, which is really how Gia and I began working together on Forget the Funnel several years ago. We met through a women in tech networking group and kind of realized through a quick call that we had very similar marketing and growth philosophies. And just recently have we really boiled that down into a more defined concept, which, as you described, we're calling customer-led growth. We didn't invent the concept; it's been around for sure, but we've just recently kind of put some words to it. So I would describe customer-led growth as a business strategy or a go-to-market approach that leverages customer insights to first, I figure out at every stage of your customer's experience, how does your customer feel value? Then operationalizes those value metrics so that your entire team can operate around and measure their performance against whether or not customers are receiving value at every stage of that journey. So it's not customer-led versus product-led or customer-led versus sales-led. It's more that customer-led influences whether you as a business implement strategies that are product-led or sales-led or engineering-led and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. That totally makes sense. So that was going to be my next question, which you kind of touched on there, is that obviously product-led growth has been a sort of a trend that a lot of SaaS companies are starting to adopt or starting to sort of follow product-led growth practices, and sort of use that product as a qualification mechanism, as a way to show value upfront to help them drive greater adoption, greater retention in the long term. So how would you, for somebody who's sort of coming in thinking like, I know what product led is, I'm thinking about that as an approach that I can use in my go-to-market strategy, what would you tell them? Like, how would you sort of position that against or compare that to what customer-led growth means, and sort of how is that different operationally, if at all?
Sure, that's a really good question. I think the first place that my mind goes in terms of how to kind of define the difference between the two, again, not that it's customer-led versus another, but let's pretend, for example, that you lead an organization or you work within an organization that is X led. Let's say that you're at a product-led organization, right? So customers primarily come into your product via a free trial. There is no sales team. They decide whether or not to become paying customers on their own. At most, they have a support or success team that provides at scale solutions to help them out. That is all well and good. Gia and I are both huge fans of the product-led approach. But let's say at some point in your organization's journey of growing, your company decides to move up market. Super common stage at many companies' journeys, especially in SaaS. At that point, the idea of being fully product-led in many cases begins to break down, because you are, in moving up market, targeting a customer whose needs require more hand-holding than a product-led experience solely can provide. So it's not necessarily, so being customer-led in that environment, I guess to continue the analogy, being customer-led in that environment would mean redefining for this new higher touch type of customer that you're targeting, figuring out, okay, how is this customer's needs different than the needs that we are currently fulfilling by supporting people only through our product? What are the new questions they're going to have? What are the new requirements they're going to have before they can make a purchase from us? What additional buyers do we have to cater to now? And so on and so forth. So customer-led growth doesn't necessarily require that you pick product-led or you pick sales-led. It's more that based on where you are or where your SaaS is in its journey of growth, it's really a method of ensuring that the experience you're providing actually matches what that type of customer needs.
Got it. I love that idea that it doesn't have to be one or the other. It's not picking and choosing. It's picking the right tool. Like, these are all tools to help,
right,
increase revenue, increase acquisition, whatever metric you're trying to influence. And it's customer-led is sort of I don't know if framework is the right word, but it's a method or a process for identifying which tool is the right one to use at any given time.
Exactly.
Really you're great at setting up the next question. Which one thing that you mentioned here is, like, you need to, in order to pick the right tool and to be customer-led, you need to know what's important to your customers, right? What do they value at each stage in the journey? So the next sort of step here is, like, how do you actually do that, right? Like, what are the customer insights that you're looking for that are going to sort of guide this approach, and where do you start in collecting them, like understanding them, and then ultimately, making the decision about where to go next based on those?
You are setting me up so well right now, Stuart. You don't even know. In a good way. And I say that because behind the scenes, to be transparent, Gia and I are working on a program called the Customer-Led Growth Program that will be available within one of the membership tiers of Forget the Funnel once it's finalized. And like, I am in the process right now of being forced to kind of put that everything you just described down on paper. So this timing is like really great. And this will be a test run of what I've put down on paper. You can poke holes in it. So in terms of where you start gathering those customer insights, and then how you go about gathering them, what Gia and I have landed on is, well, it first starts with how big is the organization you're at, and therefore how many other team members do you need to get bought on with this idea? If it's you as a founder or a series of founders, that's one thing. If it's you within a 100-person organization, you're probably going to want to build, you're probably going to want to build a team across you and your department and a couple other customer-facing departments to move this forward and get more perspectives. But in either case, whether it's you alone or you and a small, like you and your customer-led team, so to speak, the first place you'd want to start is identifying what we're currently calling across your customer journey, the critical business opportunity. So I say that because this idea that you've got this beautiful customer experience that value at every stage is really hard to achieve. Your customer and their needs are always changing. The landscape is always changing. Your company is growing. So you really need to zoom in and identify where within our customer's experience do we have the most room to improve or increase revenue or whatever it may be right now, or retain revenue that's currently disappearing because we have a churn problem. So it starts with identifying where along your customer's experience you have the most opportunity. Onboarding is a really hot topic right now. That's a place that gets a lot of love. ProfitWell often talks about the value of increasing retention. So it starts with where do you have room to grow, and then from there, a method that I know you and I know and love very well is identifying your ideal customers who've gone through that stage in the journey and actually learning from them, especially via interviews. And I don't know how deep down the rabbit hole of like customer interviews you want to go. We could go there.
We can go down the rabbit hole.
But once you've identified where within your customer's experience you want to focus, we'll say onboarding, because what the heck, why not? We'll say maybe we've got an onboarding problem. We're driving in new trials and they're not converting to new customers the way we want them to. Your next step is figuring out, of the customers that you have converted, or of those who've gone through your trial, who've converted to customers and are a good fit. So they are not a huge burden on support. They're super engaged. They're it depends on your pricing structure, but they have a healthy LTV. What was it that convinced them to go all the way through that experience? And what were the gaps for them? Again, and this is such a, like, I'm talking about standard jobs to be done stuff here, right? Like, right. All of which, and I'm sure you've discussed with many of your other guests. But we typically recommend a combination of interviews, depending on the size of your customer base. We might use survey to help further identify patterns across the customer base. We can't speak with everyone. Right. Of course, there's leveraging your team's collective knowledge. Those are all, I know I'm kind of like skimming the top of many like ways of gathering insight. And that's only because I'm not sure how detailed you want me to get.
No, that's silly. If we probably shouldn't rabbit hole on too many things here. We could be here for hours talking about capturing customer insight.
Right. So I guess to bring myself out of the rabbit hole, the multi-step process in terms of getting started with or orienting your company around customer-led growth is assemble your team. If you are at an organization where you would need to get other champions bought into this idea with you, assemble your team, identify the biggest opportunity along the customer journey, and then zoom in on that opportunity and start learning from good customers who've gone through that stage of the journey. That's the TLDR version so far.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think onboarding is a great example of this because it's very measurable, right? Like you see, numbers, X number of people in, why people came out as successful customers, however we define that, whether it's revenue, whether it's engagement, whatever is meaningful to that particular company. One thing that I do want to go a little bit into the rabbit hole on is because you mentioned both interviews and survey data and interviewing, team members who maybe have direct interaction with customers on a regular basis. What's the right mix there? Because this is a question that I get all the time or an objection that comes up when I'm talking about, how have you interviewed customers, right? And a common objection is, well, no, but what's 5 interviews going to do, or what's 10 interviews going to do? We have thousands of customers, or tens of thousands of customers. Is that representative of, our customer base at large? Like, can we actually use that to make decisions? So I'm curious to get your take on that, especially working with companies who have large numbers of customers, have large sort of potential pool of insights to pull from.
That's like the $1 million question. So much of that is going to depend on the target market that you're focusing on. So the amount of customers you may need to learn from to represent a customer base that is only a couple dozen, maybe 100 or a few hundred customers, because you're serving an enterprise market, is really different from trying to get a representation of a customer base that is several thousand customers large. So, typically lower ACV self-serve product.
Right.
So you do have to start there. And you do have to, I would say, like, it's a bit of an art and a science, in that there's not going to be a like perfect formula for every single company. What I have had success with, and I say that in terms of like my own research when I was in-house, and then also in working with clients, what I have found to be really valuable. So to start with, what I've found to be valuable in selling this idea internally, that it is a worthwhile exercise to get customers on the phone, is asking someone who has decision-making power, well, do you know why this type of customer, let's pretend we've identified what ideal customer is here. Like, do you know why this person decides to buy today rather than 6 months ago or 6 months from now? Like, what is the thing that makes them decide to buy today? And typically internal team members have ideas and theories, but it's very rare that level of granularity has been captured internally. And not knowing that and realizing, shit, there's a major gap in our internal knowledge, is often a good motivator to get people on board and say, okay, yeah, this is probably an important thing to learn.
Right. Yeah, I think it's really nice to be able to boil that down to sort of one question. I think that's a great takeaway for people listening to that. I might steal that one as well.
Go for it. Let me know how it goes.
Yeah. To have that sort of one point of sort of reference to come back to get buy-in for this sort of thing. And that's something that you can continue to revisit, right? Like, what was true, what the answer to that question 6 months from now may be different than there's
Absolutely.
now as markets change, which is obviously sort of particularly relevant at the moment with COVID and everybody's buying behavior changing.
Exactly. Yeah, we actually, we just did a Forget the Funnel like Q&A session the other day. And that was a topic that was discussed. Like, what do you do if your market has entirely changed and you're now in a situation where your traffic has dropped or your trials have dropped and so on and so forth? You're totally right that in an economic shift like this, those who are now buying from you may be entirely different, and their reasons may be entirely different than those of the customers you served 6 months ago. So this is actually an ideal time to be revisiting those topics.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it's made easier if you've implemented sort of systems and process internally to sort of continually capture these insights and sort of make sure that you always have that gut check of, do we know why customers buy? So sort of to wrap this, also round out this this process, or this customer-led sort of growth approach. Like, now that we know, where the biggest opportunity is for growth in our business, we have our team, which I guess is the other way around. Team, our biggest opportunity, and now we know why our best customers buy. How do we actually apply that to decision making? Which ultimately, all of this stuff, sort of up to now, doesn't do anything by itself, right? You have to actually apply that to the work that you're doing, sort of moving forward. So, what's sort of the for lack of a better word, I guess, the implementation plan for taking these insights and turning it into, I guess, money on the back end?
Totally. The important part, right?
Right.
The reason we have jobs. So the place that my head typically goes right after, and again, I recognize that what you and I are describing is a process that takes teams months to do, right? Like
Right.
get buy-in, identify the opportunity, get the customers on the phone, parse the insights, and we're flipping through it like, la, 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 okay, you got
Right.
your team. Okay.
Right.
But let's say you've gone through a process like that in your quest to, or like in your mission to create customer-led growth. And you've gathered these insights, you've learned from customers. Okay, this is why they went and they sought us out. This is what convinced them that we were the best solution. This is what they saw or experienced with our product that made them realize, yes, I'm sticking with this, blah, 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 right? Like they had a successful experience with you all the way through.
Right.
The next step is, in most cases, in almost every case that I've experienced, is reevaluating what KPIs you currently use to measure success against against what signified what signified within that customer story that they felt value.
Right.
And if it's helpful to kind of make that a bit more tangible, I had a really interesting conversation with the head of growth at a SaaS company about a year ago, and he had just come on board. He was super excited, and he was in that phase of like just getting started with the job where he was trying to assess like, how are we performing at every stage?
Right.
And he had happened to build out a dashboard using pirate metrics. So he had he had acquisition, activation, retention, blah, 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 or whichever order they go in. I feel like it's changed, and people have added an extra A and another
Retention,
R.
revenue, referral.
Yeah. So I know like the idea of pirate metrics is familiar, but it's morphed over the years. All to say, we were looking at this dashboard together that he had built out, and he was struggling because he was looking at on his dashboard, he was looking at the column activation. He had it set up in a spreadsheet. And I was asking him, so what does activation mean for your customers? Does that mean that they have started the trial, or does it mean that they have reached the moment, they reached their aha moment where they're like, I get it, I'm going to stick with this thing? Does it mean they've subscribed and like they're paying you now?
Right.
And he kind of sat back and he was like, I don't actually know which of those things it means. Which is not to say that he'd done a bad job of building a dashboard, but he was leveraging metrics that we use generally to describe a customer's experience going through a SaaS product, but they weren't actually representative of what his customers went through step by step.
Right.
So once you have gathered those customer insights, you're in a much better position to map out, for our ideal customer, what are each of the stages they go through, and how do we quantify those stages to better understand where they are dropping off and where we're doing a good job.
Right. Yeah, that totally makes sense, that until you align what you think is valuable with what your customer thinks is valuable, you could be optimizing or, working on things that are just not remotely relevant to actually moving the needle on growth or whatever your goals are, right?
Right.
Yeah, so I guess we could talk about this stuff for hours and hours. But to sort of tie a bow on this, for somebody who is, maybe and this I think is pretty common, at least for the people that I've spoken to, they know that they should be more customer centric. They should be talking to more customers, that there is value in better understanding your customers. Where do you start? Right? Like what's the very first thing that you can go and do, today, this week, that, and like you say, we sort of breezed through all these steps pretty quickly. But for somebody who can sort of do something and get the ball sort of moving in the right direction, what's the first thing that you would recommend they do?
It's going to, like everything, depend on what role you're in and what type of company you're working at, right?
Right.
So what's your priority? If you are in a marketing role and you are mainly tasked with driving more traffic, you have one priority. If you are in a product role and you're mainly tasked with increasing an engagement metric of some kind, it's going to look different for you. Right. The best place typically to start, the content of what I'm going to say will change depending on your priorities, but the best place to start is gathering up a list of your ideal customers who've recently taken whatever leap of faith with you that they're supposed to take. So let's pretend, again, I'm going to go back to the marketing example because it's just, I'm trying to make this a bit more tangible. But let's say that you are tasked with driving traffic to your company's website. And you're trying to understand, what are we doing right and what are we doing wrong? I would start by, actually, traffic is even tougher because you're talking about people who have not converted. It's probably that's like a level 2 example.
Right.
Let's take it like one step further inside the customer journey, and you're trying to understand from people who signed up for the trial, why did they trust in you, right? And or why not, right? What would have stopped them? The first place to start is gathering up a list of people who appear to be good fits. So in a trial experience, for example, that would be people who have already reached the activate. They've already reached whatever aha moment you want them to reach. And shoot them a quick email. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be something like big and automated. It could literally just be an email from your personal email address sent from your like G Suite inbox that says, hey, my name is so-and-so. I'm in charge of X at this company. And I just wanted to know what was going on in your world that led you to sign up for product name. Like that would be the simplest place I would start.
Right. Yeah. What's amazing too is that taking that simple approach, you're probably going to get better response rates and better responses.
Totally. Because it looks like a real email.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's amazing. I just, Sam Wheelik, actually, who was on the podcast, we just released this episode recently too, said exactly the same thing.
Really? That's great.
That doesn't, even his personal like user onboard site doesn't automate email, just looks through the list of people who signed up the day before
and is like, yo.
Yeah, shoots a personal note. And it's amazing the things that people say in those emails, right? And the things that, because it's coming from your customer, not from somebody else on your team or somebody who's working on the product or in marketing every day,
right?
You hear sort of things that appear out of left field, but maybe they're actually not very out of left field. They're just things that are from your customers, not from you.
Honestly, Stuart, you bring up a really good point there that we kind of glossed over when we jumped from you gather insights to you quantify them with and you look at your KPIs. The quantifying of insights and measuring performance against those insights and generating revenue is obviously critical. And that's a major part in selling the idea to an exec team of being customer driven, customer led. But one thing you touched on just now that we didn't talk about was how powerful internally conducting this type of or doing this type of work can be in humanizing your customers and making your team as a whole more aware of who it is they're serving. And I know, like, I always hesitate to talk about this aspect of customer research because it feels so fluffy and like, I don't know, it feels like a nice to have. But in working on the customer-led growth program, I have been looking through like case studies of companies who transformed their business really by adopting a more customer-led approach. And one of the biggest like transformation points typically is when an internal team sees the faces of customers and hears audio transcripts and is like, oh, there's a big mindset shift moment there that's super important and harder to quantify, but still such a game changer in how the team typically operates.
Right. Yeah, I think that's so true that it's the same thing that we talk about with customers, right? Getting people to that aha moment of, oh, like, this was not expected. This is not the way that I was thinking about it, but that totally makes sense. Right. And I don't know if this is one of your examples, but I know that there's certainly plenty of other examples of companies that have done this, but I know Superhuman has a wall of their customers' faces, right? For exactly that reason, right? Like these are real people who are buying and using a product. Like knowing them at that level makes it so much easier to do everything else.
Right. And to build with that person in mind. And when I say build, I mean build marketing campaigns or build an onboarding experience or build actual new product, right?
Right. Yeah. Everything counts, right? It's all about the experience, that there is no like siloed customer experience.
Right.
You have lots of touch points across lots of different channels, lots of different mediums, and yeah, they all count and it all get sort of weighed up in your customer's mind.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. This has been really awesome. I know like I said, we could keep talking for hours and hours. We've covered a lot of stuff here. Where and I'm sure people, well, we've already mentioned Forget the Funnel and Elevate, but if people want to sort of continue the conversation, learn more about the things that you're doing with customer-led growth, get the hands on the framework itself once that's ready, where should they go to find you online and keep in touch?
Hell yeah. So Twitter is the best like water cooler chat option for sure. I do hang out on Twitter. Forgetthefunnel.com, I would say is like best option number 2. If you become a member there, we have a totally free membership, and the free membership gives you access to literally all of the content we have produced over the past 3 years. And that's also the best place to then in the future find out about the customer-led growth program once that rolls out later this year. And then Claire at heylevate.com is, I would say, option number 3 if you want to get in touch with me directly.
Cool. Well, I will certainly link all of that great stuff up in the show notes. But thanks so much for doing this. This has been really amazing. I can't wait to share it.
I'm super excited to have been invited. So thanks so much.
The Customer Conversations podcast is brought to you by the team at LearnWhy. LearnWhy integrates with all of your customer-facing tools to organize feedback and extract actionable insights. Empower your team to start growing your bottom line today with insights from qualitative data powered by LearnWhy. You can find out more at either learnwhy.co or by emailing our team at sales@learnwhy.co. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Customer Conversations podcast. If you or someone you know has expertise in growth, marketing, or product, please have them reach out to either Sean or Stuart to learn more about becoming a guest on our show. Our team can be reached by email at support@learnwhy.co.